Well, I hadn't seen Tron in a very long time. This is Steven Lisberger's 1982 classic from Disney. It was actually Steven Lisberger's company, his production company, that came up with the whole concept, the idea for this, and they went around Hollywood and eventually it was actually Disney who picked them up. And quite right too, because Disney had been groundbreaking before, but I don't think it was anything quite as groundbreaking as Tron, and I would go so far as to say this film is still unique today. I don't think any other film was shot in the same way. And if you think about how it was shot, much of it was Super Panavision, that's 65mm, and it did actually have a 70mm release. Hasn't quite got the quality because of every process it went through, but the main elements of this was 65mm. There was also anamorphic 35mm, Super 35 and VistaVision for some of the conventional effects. So what a mix of formats. There just wasn't any 16mm or Super 8 in there, but I think given more time there would have been. It's got an aspect ratio as a result of the 70mm of 2.20 to 1 throughout. Looks beautiful in here. That aspect ratio totally suits Tron. It's got a soundtrack now that's been remixed into Dolby Atmos, but at cinemas it would have had 6-track magnetic sound. And in fact, before I forget, I had a comment today on my previous HMV tour video where I went into HMV to see all the latest releases. He said he saw Tron at the Odeon Marble Arch, and I said what a shame it didn't still have the D150 screen in there. Then I thought about it, 1982, I think it did still have the D150 screen in it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that was over 70 feet or around 70 feet and had the 120-degree curve. Can you imagine what a sensation Tron would have been on that giant curved screen with 6-track magnetic sound from the 70mm print? But I was thinking about other groundbreaking films that Disney had done, and of course Fantasia. This was an experiment. Since the VHS, actually I thought I'd get this out for a sort of mix of formats. This was an experiment in sound and vision, and isn't that really what Tron is? An experiment in sound and vision. And so the other film from Disney that I thought there were some elements of Tron or some heritage that came into Tron is Disney's The Black Hole. Not quite so much maybe, but this was quite a venture for Disney in their response to Star Wars and the then current science fiction boom. So this is a Super 8 extract reel. It's a sequence just before they go through the black hole, and this is a Spanish print, so it's got Spanish subtitles but English sound, and I'm afraid this one, being a pre-1982 on poor print stock, this one, the cyan colour has faded and this one's gone terribly pink. So a beautiful box and worth keeping on that basis alone. Another film that I think has a great influence on Tron is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I say that because this is another one that's a visual and oral treat, and isn't that Tron? I think so. And of course this one was done for Cinerama screens, so very much the same as the D150 presented at the Odeon Marble Arch, or at least I think it would have been D150. And Star Trek the Motion Picture, the ending of Tron, I think I can see elements of Star Trek the Motion Picture in there. And this one too was groundbreaking. The visual effects in this were somewhat different to anything else. And in fact Star Trek, the remaining films after this, they all went a little more conventional. So this one was a bit of an experiment, a visual experiment, and that is of course what Tron is. I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I'd only seen it either as a television broadcast or a VHS tape, and that would have been around 40 years ago now. And to see it again, but to see the whole picture, not a pan and scan, and on a big screen with superb colour, great definition, good contrast, great density. What a revelation this one is. On telly, pan and scanned, it didn't have it. Of course, mono sound back then, it just didn't have the je ne sais quoi, the magic that really does make this film, and you've got to see it on a big screen. I think it will work on big tellies, but to project it and see, well, have your whole being enveloped in this image, it really is something, well, I think it's sensational. So I've got a completely different perspective of Tron now. I didn't particularly like it when I saw it all those years ago, and I did look at the Blu-ray of the sequel a few years ago, and I can remember looking at it at the time and thinking, well, this is lackluster compared to Tron, so I put some of this on before putting Tron on in here, and that's still the impression I get of this. Okay, it's a very clever film, and it's got some great special effects in it and some harks back to Tron but in an updated form, but it just hasn't got the same magic for me. I'll have to look at it again, and I know there's been another more recent sequel this year as I record this, but I don't find them in any rush to see that. But I will give this another watch. I think Tron is a sensation. The Blu-ray in here is very good, but again, the colour, the density, it's just not got that 4K magic to it. So the UHD disc, superior yet again, as you would expect every time, but I think this is something special. The sound does not really have the bass I would have expected for a sort of Dolby Atmos remix. Okay, I'm running it THX51 in here, but that sound does usually come down and decode into the THX and give you that all-enveloping surround sound that is Dolby Atmos. But this just hasn't got the bass. I don't know if it would have had the bass in 1982, but I suspect the 70mm 6-track magnetic would have been superior to the sound I heard on this, but nevertheless it's still very good, and on smaller systems I think you'll be very impressed with the way this sounds, and the surround sound in particular. Those of you who like to pick out where the sound is coming from, which channel, I don't think you'll be disappointed with the sound on this one. Now then, I looked up the box office figures for Tron, but the two sites I looked at, they only listed the domestic, the USA figures, and they said an estimated budget of $17 million, and USA takings, the first site $27 million, the second $33 million, so I suppose it's around that figure. But looking at what the sequel did, Tron Legacy, which was hundreds of millions of dollars in worldwide takings, I would imagine this did at least $45 million, maybe up to $50 or $60 million worldwide. So I remembered it as being a bit of a flop back in 1982, but it appears I was wrong. I think Disney were disappointed with it initially, but of course this film now is still going. So Spawn 2 sequels is getting a re-release here on home video. I think they're probably very pleased with how it's performed today. Maybe not so much back in 1982, 1983, but today I think they realised they had a real winner on their hands here, and I would say it's aged well. In some respects, it's prophetic. I know 2 years later we had the Terminator, so I suppose a few people were thinking along the same lines of AI and machines taking over, or computers taking over and wanted to destroy us all. But this was the basic concept of Tron. It's a bit prophetic in that regard, quite frightening really when you look at what's happening today. I think it works, and I think it works better today than it ever did. Looking at all this CGI, there's 15 to 20 minutes of CGI in there in 1982, so groundbreaking. How often am I going to use that word? It's got so much to admire about it. Okay, you could say the CGI is a bit amateur by today's standard, but it works with this film, and it's so much more enjoyable to watch this than it is some of these, well, what they think is CGI, that you can't mistake it from real life. Well, so many of us can so often. Not all the time, but so often we can, and that disappoints us. But there's another one, Last Starfighter, where it was obviously either unfinished or it was the best they could do, but for some reason it just works. And there's something about it when they're not trying to pass something off as real life that I seem to prefer looking at it in that respect. Not always, but in films like this, at the age it was, absolutely brilliant. But how this was done, black and white, 65mm negative stock for the sequences inside the computer, and they had to produce a photograph of every frame they shot in order to break it down and get the effect they wanted with, well, the backlighting and the suits either in red or green outlines, the lines on them. It's just magic. I've actually got it on the screen now as I'm talking, and I can see some of it, and it looks fantastic. So it's not going to be for everyone. It's not a conventional film, but these other films I've pointed out, particularly I think 2001, if you can't get into that, I don't think you're going to find it easy getting into Tron. But if you love 2001, this isn't quite the same work of art, but it's in that vein. And a few others, Fantasia, I know that's a cartoon, but that was an experiment as well. So if you're into these sort of experimental films that are visual treats, visual feasts for the eyes, then I think this £24.99 from HMV Blu-ray and 4K UHD Blu-ray is the one for you. The special features are all on the Blu-ray, and there were some DVD features that have been ported over. There's 2 new features for the Blu-ray. I think it's a very good Blu-ray. It just doesn't look a patch on the UHD disc, but the extras are well worth watching. There's one extra on there, it's about an hour and a half in the DVD features. They've ported over. It's 1:3:1, so you're not looking at a 16:9 image, but it's a documentary all about how it was made, and it will tell you how they actually put this picture together using all those different elements. I can't really tell you how it's done. I was looking at it and thinking this is ingenious. So something to learn for everyone in here, I think, and a great new release, and one that I heartily recommend. But as I said, if you're not into 2001 and other experimental films that for me worked, then maybe it's not for you. Right, hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please give it a like, perhaps subscribe if you haven't already, and until the next one, bye bye for now.